Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us here today for our second webinar in the Governing for Reform in Aged Care program. It's an absolute pleasure to be joining you from Ngunnawal and Ngambri country today with my colleagues here, Scott Draper and Mary Claire McDonald, and we'll introduce them a little bit more to you in a moment. First, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of all the lands we're meeting from today and pay respect to elders past, present and emerging, and also welcome any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander participants in our audience today. We're certainly thrilled to be here, and Ngunnawal country is looking pretty spectacular today in our background. So welcome to you all. We have a pretty packed agenda today, and one thing we would like to acknowledge as we start our session today is, you know, this topic that we're talking about today, leadership and collective leadership for reform, is not one where there are easy answers. So unfortunately, we're sitting here as a bunch of people with views on this who talk about this issue a lot, but we don't have all of the answers, and we really want to acknowledge that because you are all in the thick of leading in this complex situation that we all find ourselves in. And if we had a different format for today, we'd make this a big conversation. But today what we hope is that you'll leave with maybe some questions that you can take back to your board, to your leadership team, to leaders in your organisation, to create some new conversations and some new reflection about how you're leading and navigating through these times that we are in the aged care sector. So our hope is that you probably go away with some triggers for some really interesting and productive discussions back in your organisations. And we hope that the outcome of our conversation today is one that perks some curiosity to think about this some more. Now, we've been talking a lot about how we wanted to run this, and I'm feeling like I'm in a game of tennis, funnily enough, Scott. But it's a conversation today, and so we wanted to be conversational and really have a chat about some of these big questions around who are the leaders we need to be. But first, what I might do is just do a little bit of introduction so you know who you're dealing with as we enter the conversation. So I might start with you, Scott, and some of you might know the name Scott Draper. He's a little bit famous, and he doesn't like it when I do that. But I'll let you hear from Scott himself. Why are you here today, Scott?
Well, other than the fact that you invited me. Kathy has that way too. She's very influential, very persuasive. Look, first of all, thank you for having me. It is great to be with you all today, and I love spending time with these two wonderful females who I've learned a lot from. For me, why I'm here, I think the topic of leadership is something we're both, we're all very, I guess, fascinated with, and we've got a long history in this space. I think mine probably goes back to the idea of self-leadership, which is a conversational piece for today, which is a subset of leadership more broadly. And I think that probably comes from my time as an athlete, where you do learn the skills of actually leading self to try and maximize your potential and how you can kind of sustain performance over the longer journey. So I think my first reason is I'm very passionate about the topic of self-leadership. And then as I left my sort of athletic career and went into coaching and was lucky to work with Ash Barty and the like, you started to go into that realm of trying to influence others. And that's a major shift from yourself to others. And I think it was through that time of coaching and through the sports administration, where I spent some time leading national teams, I got fascinated with how I can become a better leader. And I had an experience that actually was an impetus for me to actually go into the consulting world and to try and help other leaders through the work we do. So designing and facilitating leadership programs is a real passion of mine, and hoping we can, get into some nitty-gritties around that. What about you, Mary Claire?
More famous in my own backyard than more generally, Scott. So I do a lot of work in the leadership space with you too, as you know. the work that I've been doing more recently has been focused on collective leadership and on facilitating groups of leaders to be able to build shared narratives, to be able to really take a collective approach to their roles in their organisations, which is fascinating to me. So I've done a lot of work facilitating leadership programs, which have been either in organisations or across organisations that bring all sorts of leaders together. And I think that those conversations are amazing because collectively we bring knowledge together and we create new ideas, and we help each other along across sectors or organisations or big organisations. So I think forums like this are amazing, and I love the idea of people coming together collectively and creating new knowledge and forging forward together. So that's the kind of interest that I bring particularly.
And Kathy, why are you here?
Oh, thank you. That's a big question.
Yeah.
So, look, I have spent many years, which is why I look so tired, talking with people about leadership, particularly in government, public sector, health, ageing, human services, organisations that have purpose, that are really about impacting our citizens and building a better society. And that's my passion. And I'm so privileged that I get to be paid for being in rooms with people and helping them think about the leadership role in shaping and steering organisations to be their best. And particularly in these times of reform and change and disruption, that's when the leadership work gets, really challenging. So that's a little bit about us, and hopefully that gives you a bit of a flavour for the session today. I do just need to tell you a couple of things before we kick off into our session proper. Today's session will be recorded, so you can access that post webinar. We'll be sending it out so you can show it to others in your organisation, or you can, go back over the content yourself if you want to revisit anything. We will be opening and closing the chat today. We're going to try and make it as a little bit interactive, and that's our vehicle for that. So you will see the screen pop up with the opportunity to click on a chat when we pose some questions 2 times during the session. So just be prepared for that. If your screen changes all of a sudden, that's what we're doing. We're opening your opportunity for you to post some ideas into the chat. So look, hopefully you're all in the right room, in the right place, and we can get into this now to have our conversation. And I guess the big question that we're really wanting to think about today is this one, who are the leaders we need to be in these times we're in aged care? And it's a pretty big question, but I think the critical issue that I'd like to kick us off thinking about is we're trying to talk with you today about your role as a leader, not your role in your position, not your title, not your job as CEO, your job as CFO, your job as chair, your job as board member, but your role as a leader in this sector right now. And we think they're slightly different concepts, right? Leadership sometimes is attributed to positional authority, but positional authority is a very different thing. And that is work we know you are all doing every day. It's probably rarer for you to step back and think, some of you, to think about this leadership work that you do regardless of position. And that's really where we want to go. We think there is value in asking this question in times of disruption and complexity and challenge. In fact, it's probably the most important times to be asking the question, who are the leaders we need to be? Because default approaches may not get us where we need to go. So that's a little bit of a framing of the big question that we want you to be thinking about. And it's a great question, actually, to be sitting around an executive table or a boardroom table or a tea room and asking of each other, because some of the conversations that it triggers, are quite profound. The other thing we really want to do today is make this a bit about you individually, but also you and your collective leadership team, And we're trying to think about what it's like to be a leader in these times. And so rather than us assume, we want to go to one of these questions right now. And so we're going to ask you to go into the chat. Hopefully it's popping up and you can see the little symbol there on the screen that, that signifies the chat. We're asking you to put 2 words into the chat right now as it opens. What does it feel like to be a leader in aged care right now? What words would you use to describe how it is to be leading in this sector right now? And we're just going to pause for a moment. We should have some music or something, you know, little song to go. I'm just hoping the chat has opened now and there are some things coming through. I don't think we can see them yet. People getting that? Do we know? So we should, while we're, oh, here we go. We've got, it'll take a few moments.
We've got a very large screen.
We've got a very large screen here so we can see your comments coming through. I mean, we're imagining there'll be a range of views. Some people might be feeling inspired by the opportunities ahead. Others might be feeling exhausted or challenged or overwhelmed or cranky or tired or those kind of words. So we might just let those sort of come through as the chat opens. And I guess what we're thinking about there is, you know, in these disrupted times, there will be times when people are feeling quite energized by what's happening, but there'll be other times when people who are in the same circumstance are feeling, you know, frustrated or annoyed. So
I was thinking too, Kathy, that, you know, as people are reflecting on this question, and you said, you know, we don't want to assume, and I think from my perspective, just thinking about these questions and not being a leader in aged care right now, but certainly working across many other sectors that are facing perhaps different contextual challenges, but in some respects very similar challenges. And whatever is surfacing for you is totally fine, as we know, because we go through a range of emotions and kind of experiences as we go through our leadership roles. And just want to sort of extend that to say it's okay, whatever that is, but it's good to share these, and not just for you to share it, but also for others to see what others are being, you know, what they're sharing from their collective perspective.
Hello, everybody, and I hope we're back. I'm not absolutely sure. I'm so sorry. We seem to have some technical difficulties there. I was saying some really profound things for about 5 minutes and you've missed it all. So I'm apologising for that. We'll try and recover. So look, apparently when we went off air was just as we were getting your thoughts through, and there's some pretty interesting and diverse views coming through on those responses around pressure, exciting but challenging, annoyed and targeted, privileged, frustrated, uncertainty, hopeful. You know, there's a range of things coming through there. So, you know, it does paint bruised and battered, but still hopeful. I'm not giving up. Excited, aware it will be a challenge, disappointed and frustrated. So, you know, I think, you know, we'll actually do a little bit of analysis of all that, play it back to you, because it does send a message about a tone, you know, that there's sort of very different places that people are at in the leadership role that you are all in at the moment. And of course, very challenging times, but lots by the sounds of things, lots of strengths there to draw on as well. But really, quite legitimate. No matter what the word is you wrote down, we want to acknowledge its legitimacy, and you know, we want you to be thinking about that and how it's playing out and how you show up every day as well, which I'm sure all of you are. Look, we do want to just kick on because we have kind of lost a few minutes, but just a way of thinking a little bit about leadership and framing it in the context of this sort of disruption, challenge, complexity, right? So one of the things that we think a lot about when we're dealing in times like we're in is the idea that leadership is context specific. It's not a set and forget activity. It's actually not even about your position. It's about your response to the environment that you're operating in. It's about you as the leader and how you show up, given that we're in, you know, the middle of, you know, a small crisis like a pandemic. We have weather events that are affecting us all. We have a reform agenda. We have legislative change. We have we're off the back of a Royal Commission. We have the rise of the voice of the individual through social media and so on. We have issues to do with, you know, a deficit of trust in the sector in a lot of our institutions and organisations. Aged care is not alone in that. You have workforce shortages. You have a shortage of talent. You know, all of these factors that are swirling around. And I'm sure if you spent some time in your leadership team, and I'm sure you do, talking about what are the factors that are you know, shaping our agenda and impacting on our capacity to do our best work right now, you would be having a context analysis kind of conversation on a regular basis. We also know that there's two sort of levels of leadership here now. When we traditionally think of leadership, we sometimes think about the individual, the hero, the charismatic leader, the person who shows up and tells everybody where we're going and what we're going to be focusing on. But in times of complexity and disruption, this leadership work becomes a collective effort. You can't solve the problems with one smart person with a technical solution. You can't rise to these challenges just by having a single voice and a single view. The work of trying to build a shared sense of how are we navigating our way through this, and that we show up when we come together, whether it's in the board or in a executive team context, and we actually do the heavy lifting around how we build a shared narrative, a shared view. We uncover disagreements, we surface undiscussables, all those kind of issues, the collective work, so we move together for better, right? So that's we want to talk a little bit about both those levels today, and we'll get into that. The center of this circle really talks about three things. We're hoping it's framing a way for you to think about this. You have to think about the new mindsets that are going to serve you well, and understand the defaults that you might fall back to. What are the stories you're telling yourself in your head about this situation you find yourself in as leaders? What's the mindset you bring? Is it closed? Are you cynical? Are you feeling jaded? Are you feeling exhausted? Are you feeling like others need to fix this and not you? Or are you coming with a mindset of pragmatic optimism that we can shape a future? Are you curious about what's really going on and where really the opportunities are? We're in your opening workshops in the program that we are shaping with and for you right now, we're going to focus a lot on the skills. We've built a capability framework. We'll introduce you to that in upcoming sessions. So I won't go there right now, but there are some new skills emerging for leaders in these times we're in, and we want to talk more about that in the aged care context in future sessions. Right now, I want to get us into a bit of a discussion around this area of capacity. We think this is overlooked a lot by leaders. While we're all so busy trying to get things done, move things forward, get on with the job, we fail to pay attention to our own and our colleagues' capacity. And I'm going to get Scott to talk a little bit more about this idea of self-leadership as a way of thinking about these capacity issues. How are we taking care of ourselves? How are we showing up with energy? How are we, you know, dealing with our own sort of challenges inside of of this setting that we're in. So, Scott, you do a lot of work in this area, and we've spent a lot of time talking about these issues. Do you want to just take us through a little bit about how you got into this discussion about self-leadership? What is it? What does it mean to you? What can we share with people today around how they might think about this?
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. And look, as you said up front, we are not sitting here with all the answers, and all these topics are very complex, and so is one of the wedges that you see is capacity, and you can interchange the word self-leadership with capacity if you like. We're certainly not set in our ways in terms of how we describe things, but it's really important to, I think, call out first and foremost, when you think about those three elements of skills, mindset, capacity, the way I like to think about capacity first and foremost is that if you are maximizing your capacity, it is going to have a direct influence on your skills. And by that, I mean that the better that we are looking after ourselves and maximizing our capacity, it is going to maximize the current capability that we have. And it also has a direct influence on our mindset. So the better we are taking care of ourselves, the better our mindset, the better our skills, and the more likely we're going to sustain performance over the longer journey, which we need in times of reform. In terms of my, I guess, interest and passion for this topic and where it was really born, and perhaps similarly to the reasons why everyone on this webinar is in aged care, there's probably a story, or there's probably something in your journey that has given you a genuine passion for the work you do. And similarly with me, when I think about self-leadership, it's very much in that domain. And what I mean by that is that my own experiences of struggle. So I have battled with obsessive compulsive disorder. I have had mental health challenges in my late teens. As a professional athlete, I was married. My first wife passed away at 23 years of age. And so I think these types of life obstacles, these things that we're all going to face, surface how difficult it is at times to look after yourself. And leading self in those times becomes critical, but also confronting, because you don't get it right the first time. It takes months. And for me, it actually took years in certain areas to actually become proficient. And I'll never use the word perfect, because you won't perfect these things. I always like to think of, that idea of progress over perfection. And you keep evolving. We're always becoming. And so I think that self-leadership thing was born through those struggles. But as I've progressed through my adult years, and I've transitioned through multiple kind of careers, and what I'm doing now, which is to help leaders think about the subset of leadership in my mind, which is self-leadership, because for someone who's worked in high performance as long as I have, what I've come to realize is that high performance is far easier to achieve than sustainable performance. And I believe that self-leadership is central to us trying to navigate the complexities that we're all facing on a daily basis. Notwithstanding, we still need to be focusing on developing new skills and being really cognizant of the mindset we bring to the workplace every day to maximize our ability to be effective leaders. So in terms of the self-leadership framework that you're seeing on your screen right now, I just want to bring a bit of color to this before I talk to the framework itself. And where this was born out of, it's actually born out of experience, as well as it's theoretically based. It's certainly research driven, but it was born out of my own experience of being in rooms with many, many leaders over several years. And the first thing was that I started to see these emerging themes. Now, a little bit dissimilar to what we asked you to do in the chat, which was to share what you're feeling as a leader in aged care right now. This was just more me being an innocent bystander, so to speak, of being a leader, a facilitator in the room, observing leaders, what they're sharing. And there were 4 key themes that kept emerging for me time and time again. And those 4 themes are reactivity, inefficiency, disconnection, and fatigue. And over time, I got more fascinated about these 4 elements and why that is so. And I'm wondering if I say those things, if they're starting to resonate with you. But just to give you a quick descriptor about those 4 things, reactivity and inefficiency is really born out of what you were describing, Kathy, that we are in complex times. And life is moving fast, work is moving fast, change is moving all the time. And so it's quite easy to get into this kind of reactive way of being because the future state is so unclear. And when the future state is unclear, it's very hard to prioritize what's most important. So we can just get into the day-to-day and we're reacting in the moment. And so this reactivity drives the second bit, which is this inefficiency, which we're doing a lot of stuff, we're busy, we're working 24/7, but we don't really necessarily feel like we're having the impact we want to have, or what is the work that's really making the difference. You kind of feel like you're spinning your wheels. And this is in direct contrast or tension to even some of the core theories around motivation. We want to feel competent. Like, it's one of the core things. We want to feel competent as leaders. And when we're feeling reactive, when we're feeling inefficient, that's flying in the face of that core motivation of feeling competent. Secondly, autonomy is, which is also a real key motivational drive for all of us. When you've got regulators and you've got change and you've got people telling you how to actually do the work of leading transformation, it becomes quite challenging, because what's the choices we have in this and how we're going to use that collective leadership to come together to solve these really complex problems. Thirdly, after we move from the reactivity and efficiency, we go to the disconnection. And this is because of the lives we're leading and how busy we are at work. We're losing ourselves in that process. We're not having time for ourselves, our hobbies, significant others. So this disconnection is really strong. The fourth, which is probably the most common for all of us, and I think we were even reflecting on this when we came into the room today, we're fatigued also. This is not something that we have the silver bullet to. We're tired. We're trying to manage our time and have that boundary management going strong all the time as well, because it's really difficult. So anyway, these four things drove a curiosity for me to develop a framework that I believe can help us lay a really strong foundation in the self-leadership domain that I said will maximize that capability and help us sustain performance. And it's self-compassion, purpose, and energy. Now, to bring this to life, and we'll have a bit of a game here. I'm going to share a story, but it's a story where I ran a conference. I was a speaker at a conference, and I had about 300 or 400 people in the room. I'm going to tell you that story, but as I'm telling you the story, perhaps you virtually could even kind of go through the same process that I was asking people in this room to go through. And Mary Claire and Kathy, you can perhaps do the same, because I think it's something we can continually reflect on. So in this room, I had 300 people. I got them all to stand. So if you wanted to stand virtually, you can certainly do that. We can't see you, so it's up to you. And sometimes when we're working from home, we've got the beautiful attire above the desk, but below the desk it might look a little bit different. So we might need to manage that one. Anyway, so what I'm going to do is going to run through some questions. And as I ask these questions, I want you to reflect on if this is a real, genuine strength that you possess. So when you reflect on these questions, it's like, yes, I have that in spades. It's a genuine strength that I trust myself in. I really do this stuff well. So I'm going to start in the self-compassion domain. So if you think about your inner coach for a moment, do you possess an inner coach that when you are going through difficulty, when that inner critic is surfacing, when you're feeling that imposter syndrome, you are genuinely leveraging and practicing and deploying that inner coach that speaks to you the same way you would speak to someone you really cared about going through a tough time? So what is your inner coach really like? Are you proud of it? Is it helping you, or is it breaking you down?
She's tough. She's tough. She's hard on me.
Yeah.
And it's okay. The second is around self-care. So when you're going through these difficulties, and some of you, I think someone felt like, you're a bit battered and bruised, but still going, and some were sharing lots of different emotions. But when we're going through these tough times, are you practicing self-care? Are you really taking time out for you? Are you doing things that are going to help you bring the best out in yourself? The third is acceptance. And are you really practicing that internal locus of control? Are you accepting your shortcomings? Do you feel worthy enough? Are you doing things that are really going to center you on the things that really matter, and kind of let go and accept the things that are out of your control? So if you feel like all those things are a real strength, you would remain standing. If not, you would sit down. I'll move on to the second component, which is purpose. Do you get out of bed every single day with a real clear understanding of why you do what you do, it brings you energy, it brings you resilience. When you're faced with those tough times, you know exactly why you're doing it, grounds you. It's worthy of pushing through rather than going, you know what, this is not worth it. Are you really clear in that purpose? Can you articulate it? Do you have a clear purpose statement across your work, your life, and your community? If that is for you, remain standing. If not, you would sit down. And lastly, when we come to energy, what's your physical energy like? Do you bounce out of bed every day just going, oh my God, I have got energy to burn. I'm ready to go. Like I've just got energy that needs to be released right now. Or are you kind of feeling a bit like, you know what, where's that first coffee? The second is, do I have the mental and emotional, and they are slightly different. The mental emotion, the mental energy is around your sharpness. It's around your memory retention. It's your executive functioning. And your emotional side is, are you feeling really connected to self, to what matters? Are you feeling like your emotional state is in that kind of idea of flourishing? You're happy, you're got a sense of meaning, all those types of wonderful things. And the last is, are you using that energy to be really productive? So how are you using that energy? And if you feel like that's a real strength, you would remain standing. So I'm not sure how you went in that exercise, but to give you a bit of color as to what happened in the room where I had 300 or 400 people standing, and I kept asking people to sequentially remain standing or sit down as I went through those questions, I had 7 people standing. And I've got to say that my hypothesis going into that was that I would have no one standing. And I was actually very surprised that there were still 7 people standing. And I made a comment to these people to say, whoever you are, I'm going to come and speak to you. I want to know what you do and how you do it, because this stuff is really hard. So if you feel like your inner critic is in overdrive because you didn't answer those questions perhaps the way you would like to, it's okay. You're not alone. And these are things that perhaps start to surface what might be most important for you when you think about these 3 core elements. Now, self-compassion, in my mind, is the base, because if you are looking after you, if you've got a strong inner coach, it's going to make you lean into challenge more likely, because you feel like you've got the trust and the support around yourself to actually manage that. Hence the idea of courageous vulnerability in the center. If you do self-compassion well, you're more likely to take those risks. If you have purpose, it builds resilience. And if you have capacity, if you have energy, it builds that capacity that we need to perform. So we were thinking about sharing a couple of ideas within the framework. But before I do, initial reactions, for you, Kathy, in terms of that model, what stands out for you?
Oh, I just have to share. Scott and I do a lot of work together, and he applies this framework to me, and I see him look at me some mornings and say, "How are you, Kathy?" And I straight away think, "Oh God, he's worked out that I haven't had any sleep, or I'm worried about things, I'm stressed, I'm not taking care of myself." So you're very good at asking those. But I think the one that stands out for me, Scott, is that whole inner critic, inner coach kind of issue, and the catching myself in that self-talk about I'm not good enough, I'm not prepared enough, I'm not up to it, I'm going to make a fool of myself, all those things that we tell ourselves every day. Oh, I do. We, she says, collectively. I really have to manage that, and I'm starting to learn some strategies around that, to notice the thoughts and send them on their way and replace them with more productive ideas about what could possibly be happening. But that one resonates for me a lot.
And it's hard to catch yourself too, right? When you're in fast forward, and again, we want to feel like we're good at what we do, and it's hard to catch yourself and then go straight in a coach. It's something you have to practice on a daily basis. Mary Claire, what's resonating with you?
So I think what resonates with me, Scott, with this model is how fluid it can be, and how, we do a lot of work together, and I've seen this model before, and I know my inner critic can be hard on me. So I keep an eye on her, and sometimes I feel like I'm doing a great job at that. And sometimes I slip back into this real self-criticism, and I don't catch it early enough. And so it's that kind of idea of you know, sometimes I do bounce out of bed with all of the vim and vigor of a woman half my age, and sometimes I drag myself out of bed. I don't want to go and do what I have to do, and that weighs on me. So I feel like it's like you say, it's really hard to do all of them well. And I feel like it's a constant juggle for me to be thinking about, okay, so what can I do for myself today that's going to help me connect to my purpose? Or what can I do for myself that's going to give me a little bit more enthusiasm for what I know I have to do today? So that's kind of one of the
It's a good point too,
I like
because
that.
I think one thing I didn't call out, but you've just raised that, which I think is a really important thing to call out, is sometimes people see this, and we're certainly not saying that you have to kind of nail the lot at once. This is a work in progress, and maybe you just start with one little area of this framework if you're finding it useful. And it's interesting that the three of us have kind of gone to the self-compassion, because that's my greatest struggle. I feel like I'm really strong in the purpose and quite strong in the energy domain. The self-compassion area for me has been, in some respects, a lifelong journey, and continues to be a lifelong journey to feel really proficient at that. I came from the school of, if you're struggling, harden up. If you're tired, keep going. Take a cement pill. These are the kinds of thoughts that I had, and they're just not helpful, and they're not sustainable. But some of you might be out there listening and going, geez, I'm actually pretty good at self-compassion for purpose, but it's the energy piece. So what we thought might be really useful, just quickly, is to call out maybe a couple of ideas that are quite common. We've sort of talked about the inner critic, inner coach, but really all that's about, to Kathy's point, is just acknowledging that, one, this is normal to have one. It's actually part of our survival instincts. We need it, but it also, we give it a little bit too much air and it grows legs. And we've got to really monitor it and ask the question, is my inner voice or inner critic working to build me up or break me down? And if you're in the space of it's there to build me up, you're going really well. And if it's not, it's something to work on. And how you can turn that inner critic into coach becomes really pivotal. The purpose piece, one thing that we spoke about in the lead into this webinar is that we've got an audience here that are very, very purpose driven. You're doing incredibly important work, and having that organizational and that real why you do what you do understanding is the very thing that's going to give you the resilience you need. But this idea of purpose can extend beyond just our work purpose. It can be a holistic idea of, why do we do what we do? Why do we get out of bed in the morning? And for me, if I was to choose one real passion topic out of these three, it's probably purpose. I've found it to be the very thing that's helped me navigate transition and complexity, probably more than any of the others. Not to say that they're not all individually important. And so when it comes to purpose, one way to think about this is that it could be broken down into three really important areas. One is, what are the values that drive you? What are some of the personal philosophies that you have that really guide the way in which you want to show up? And answering the question, why you do what you do, which is to actually articulate that into a purpose statement. My purpose statement actually encapsulates those three areas of values, personal philosophy, and the why I do what I do. And one little idea that we would offer is to think about your life as a story, as a set of chapters, and there's no doubt going to be pivotal moments, turning points, sliding door moments that have shaped who you are, what you believe, and what you value. And it's a nice way to surface those very things that matter most to you. I mean, Kathy, you've done a lot of work in the turning points. Is something you wanted to touch on just from a turning points perspective that you feel is important?
Well, I just think it's such a powerful, and for individuals and for groups to sit down. We do this work a lot with executive teams, Scott, don't we, and Mary Claire, around really thinking about those moments that have really mattered in your life, that have shaped you, and why they've shaped who you are today. And then being able to talk about those in a way that starts to crystallize what's driving you forward, personally and professionally. I think it's such a great exercise to do for yourself, but it's really powerful to do in a group. Yeah,
very powerful, great trust building exercise.
And the originator of that work is Bob Dick from. There's a shout out to Bob, who's a absolute legend, but that Turning Points exercise really comes from his work with helping groups to be effective. So, yeah.
And lastly, the energy domain. There is so much we can cover in all these elements, but to make an assumption, one idea that might be useful is in this idea of recovery or strategic recovery. And one of the things that we know happens time and time again with leaders, and it's the work we do, and it's because we care and we are very purpose driven, we tend to work a lot longer than we perhaps need to. And it's perhaps going into the boundary management. How do I set boundaries for myself that's going to give me the time and freedom to do the things that I need to do for me and for others that I care about? But one of the things that falls by the wayside most commonly is sleep. And if there was one thing that perhaps you could do in the energy domain that would give you a lot of bang for buck, is to try and focus a little more attention on your sleep. Now, that's much easier said than done, just to say, hey, let's go and get a better night's sleep. First and foremost, one of the things that we need to do is to change our mindsets around sleep. And that is that we are one of the only species that cuts back on sleep. So if we can just focus a little bit more attention at the end of the day to give ourselves a little bit of time to shut down so that when we do get to sleep, we actually get quality sleep. The other thing that can really help sleep during the day, or help sleep, is to do one little thing during the day, which is to get some downtime, even for 5 minutes. Just do some mindfulness or a bit of breathing, just to get that slow time, because we know it has a positive impact on sleep at night. So if you're feeling fatigue is one of those elements for you, then perhaps sleep and a little bit of slow time and practicing that sleep hygiene, what you do before you go to bed, that would give you a little bit more energy to bounce out of bed the next day to kind of tackle the stuff that you need to tackle. So hoping that resonates. This is all about that idea of self-leadership, which again is a subset of leadership. And we're talking about this from an individual perspective. We know this work is critical because leadership is important, but a real theme for today is this idea of collective leadership. And so maybe we'd like to open it up to Mary Claire to think about this idea or the things we've been discussing in the context of collective leadership.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. So I think what I'm going to do today is really just briefly give you an idea of what I see in my work around collective leadership with leadership groups. And then we're going to hand over to Kathy after that to talk about, so why is collective leadership so important in these times, and why is it that we're sort of focusing on collective leadership for this program. So I might do that by sort of posing some questions that groups that I work with sort of need to consider to sort of form up a collective view of the work that they're doing. So one of those questions is, are we as a leadership group aligned, truly aligned around what it is that we're trying to do in our organisation or in the sector more broadly? Do we have a common understanding of our challenges? Have we talked about them in detail? Do we understand each other's perspectives about what we're trying to achieve, about the outcomes we're trying to achieve together for our organisation? In unpicking those challenges and trying to define those outcomes, are we surfacing conflict? Are we surfacing things that we need to discuss and having those discussions in full? Are we, or are we sort of shying away from those? Are we sort of thinking, oh, well, that's all a bit awkward, that's going to cause a fight, so we'll just leave that aside for the moment because we've got things to do, and we can achieve things without really addressing that, because collective leadership requires that we engage with those conflicts, requires that we unearth those, requires that we collect views on what is at the heart of those conflicts, of what we could do to address those challenges, that we're not elevating certain voices and not listening to others. And and not even that, but some people aren't sort of keeping quiet because they want to keep everything calm, and they don't really think that their view is important. So as a member of your leadership team, whether that be an executive team or as a member of a board, are you having the courage to speak up when you see a problem, or when you have a piece of information that others maybe don't know that might set the cat amongst the pigeons, so to speak? Or are you just keeping quiet for the sake of an easy life? Because as Scott said, often an easy life is what we strive for, because a lot of us are overwhelmed, and the situations that we find ourselves in are so busy and so high paced, and to bring these things up sometimes can feel like you're being a blocker. So the work that I do with leadership teams is to help them engage in those conversations, to help them come to those conversations with empathy, with compassion, not just for each other in the leadership team, but for their organizations, for their people, for their consumers or customers or clients, or whatever they want to call their audience. So are we including all of those views in the conversation? Are we, and that's hard, right? So those conversations can be messy, they can be complex, they can be ongoing, they can be solutionless. So do we have a leadership group that's courageous enough to engage in those conversations and to stick with them, even when there's not a real easy answer and there's not a simple sort of solution? So they're the kinds of things that I work with leadership groups to be able to do. So it requires some new skills, like Kathy was talking about at the beginning of the session. It requires for some collaborative sort of skills. It requires high trust in the leadership team, which is some of these things like the turning points exercise. Those kinds of conversations can help to build trust. It requires strong self-leadership. It requires for us to show up in a way that enables those kinds of conversations to happen. So it all sort of comes together in that way. So Kathy, I know you've got views on why collective leadership is important for our times. So I might hand over to you to sort of dig into that.
Thank you, Mary Claire. And look, I think you're probably getting the message that we're trying to convince you today, that this whole idea of moving together, being a collective, is what's required for us to really navigate this reform environment and this disruptive environment that we're in. And I wanted to sort of wrap up this collective kind of conversation by talking about this is not for the faint-hearted. It's actually really hard work. And the reason it's hard work is because we are not, by the time we get to CEO or CFO, senior executive, chair of a board, we have got there off our own hard work and effort. And we think we're probably not too disappointed in ourselves for the achievements that we've made.
On good terms,
some of us, which is good. We've got confidence. But the work of collective leadership is actually different, and we're not trained for it. We're not hardwired for it yet, but increasingly it's becoming the norm as we delve more and more in our complex world. So the idea that interdependence needs to be present. It's not a norm in most boards in our country. It's not a norm in most executive teams. And we know that actually what you talk about and the focus of your boardroom and executive team conversations actually flows through to outcomes for your consumers. There's a direct line between the conversations you're having and whether you're pushing through and having the harder conversations, or whether you're going through the motions, the theatre of the governance structures. That's great, important, not enough, right? Not enough. So the collective work is hard. The other thing probably to say with this is the collective idea sits a little bit uncomfortably next to mechanistic hierarchical kind of models. So you've actually got to make some conscious choices about what kind of conversations you're having at the leadership table. You know, are we in a conversation about our managerial functions and our you know, financial performance and our governance structures and arrangements and our decision system orientation? Or are we actually in a conversation about how we're shaping the future of this organisation and shaping the outcomes for our consumers and working together to be curious and ask the hard questions and be one shade braver to challenge and be that person? I often think about it, the pain in the neck who's going to say, can I just check that we, you know, understood? And we hold it back because we don't. And there's some great empirical research around how this plays out very practically in rooms and the flow on effects of that for, you know, really truly creating collaborative outcomes. So this is work that we know is needed, and it's conversations that are needed around executive tables, boardroom tables, to really start to bring it to life and really surface what does it mean for us. And there's no silver bullet here. The conversation is about, what does collective leadership look like for us? Who are the leaders we need to be? What are we asking of each other from a leadership perspective, not necessarily a positional authority perspective, right? That's the whole idea. And so there's a bit of a provocative question there on the slide about, you know, are you actually a leadership team, a collective, or are you just showing up to a meeting every quarter or every month or every week, whatever the rhythm is, and going through the motions and doing the theatre? Not that you're not talking about important things, because all of us are talking about important things in those forums. Are you really thinking about the leadership aspects of that that's going to really make the difference? So the whole idea of a conscious choice, do we want to move together, or are we comfortable just continuing in the path we're in? So look, there endeth the ideas around collective leadership. We hope it's giving you some food for thought. We hope it's given you some questions today, whether they're the individual questions about your own self-leadership and how that's playing out in your collective world, or whether it's questions about how are we navigating the harder conversations in our board or in our leadership team, and how are we showing up to do that, and have we had the conversations that are really going to set us up for success as we move into, you know, the challenging times that you've all described in those earlier comments. So there's some questions, and we hope you'll go away and ponder those in your own settings with your colleagues and peers. But before we go today, we do want to ask you one more question in the chat, and I'm just going to keep all of my fingers and toes and everything crossed that we don't mess this up and go off air. So the chat is about to come up again, I hope, for you to enter. And while we just talk about the closing comments, just in thinking in this indulgence that we've had, and congratulations to you for taking some time out to really reflect on this issue of leadership. Having thought about some of those things that we've talked about today, and from your own experience, how would you answer this question? Who are the leaders we need to be to shape and steer our organisations for and to reform? Who are the leaders we need to be? How would you describe that? And let's get some things coming through on the chat. We really want to use this to flow through into the future elements of the program. We're really keen for you to see what others are thinking and feeling as we go to wrap up the session today. But it would be great just to get some of your commentary coming through. And Mary Claire's going to tell me when that starts to happen. I guess what our closing sort of remarks from if we had a message today. I mean, our message is, of course, that there are, from me, I'll go to you, Scott and Mary Claire, but from me, we really feel like there's there's a need for great empathy for the people who are in the roles that you are in at the moment, and empathy for each other, but empathy in the system, because that empathy allows us to have courage and vulnerability and be maybe one shade braver in how we show up, in how we think about our own role and place in this important reform work, and how we can work together to shape something better than we've had in the past. Not and actually to use some of our strengths, not just focus on our weaknesses, in order to leverage for good. So I think that would be my sort of thing I'd like to leave people with. Scott, what's your takeout for today?
I'd extend that, Kathy, from the empathy perspective and say that if we're being empathetic, we're putting ourselves in other people's shoes. And I think if we're doing that, the mindset is there, but also what that's going to do is we're going to be mindful about the impact we're having on others. And we've been talking about individual and collective leadership. Even in the individual domain, what you do is obviously still going to have an impact on what others do. So from a leadership perspective, if we're, practicing things like boundary management or, self-care or all these things, it's going to flow through to the organization in terms of the culture you set around looking after yourself. And then the collective stuff is if you're obviously doing that from a collective perspective, it's going to change the culture and have leadership at multiple levels. So you kind of collapse the structure and everyone's going to be in this together. So I think for me, it's all interconnected. But really want to say thank you for the work you do. It's incredibly important, and thanks for allowing us to be in your space, so to speak. Mary Claire?
Yeah, I'd second what both of you have said, and I might just bring us back to the comments because they're coming through now. There's some really great comments about the need for compassionate and inclusive leaders, for leaders to be leading by example, for advocates using strong, respectful language, being bold. This is really, I hope you're all reading each other's comments as well, because this would be really helpful for you to have a look at, to see what each other are thinking and saying. So courageous, committed leadership, risk takers, change agents, visionaries. So, and I think to draw back to what Scott was talking about, this idea of compassion is so important in the work that you do in the aged care sector. But don't forget to have compassion for yourselves and for each other as well, because what you're doing is such hard work. And like Scott said, such important work. And I think that that's a really great thing to take away from our conversation today.
And there's a comment there about the system, the reform agenda doesn't allow the time for this self-leadership. And therein lies the challenge. The context draws on us and it pulls us in different directions away from where we know we need to be. So I hear that challenge. I hear it loud and clear, and we all grapple with that all the time to carve out the space. This is where collective becomes something that actually could be quite a neat idea, because if you're working together to create the space for little bits of moments where you take time out to say what's actually going on here, get some perspective. How are you? How are we? How are we showing up? These are little minor nudges in the right direction, right? So just being mindful of it is really important as well. We feel very privileged to have been able to spend an hour and what will be an hour and 15 minutes with a little bit of a glitch in the middle. I should stop talking about it, shouldn't I? This inner critic coming through, Scott. Living by age. So what we would like to do is wish you all a very safe and happy Anzac Day weekend. We would really like to encourage you to, go forth and think about your personal needs in terms of the leadership, because we need you to stay strong and upright and do this heavy lifting for the reform agenda. So we realise you're in the thick of it, and we really, hope that we can work with you over the next, little while in this program to help you navigate some of this work. We will be sending you material in the next couple of weeks about the next round of activities in the program. There's introductory workshops, there's online modules coming, there are more drops coming at you. Hopefully you're seeing some of those drops of content and material and little nudges to remind you to do things. We know there's some time investment required to complete the diagnostic tool that is part of your registration process. What we hope is that there will be a return on that investment. So we'd like to encourage you to stay with it and complete the diagnostic tool, because we will be playing back some of the insights from that across the sector to you over the next few months. So don't forget to share the webinar content that we'll send you. And on that note, I think I would like to thank you all very much for attending, and on behalf of KPMG and the Commission, we really appreciate your time today, and we'd like to wish you well. Thank you.